Hello, I'm Adam Shepherd.
I'm Jane McCallion.
And you're listening to another episode of the ITPro Podcast. Coming up on this week's show, we'll be talking about coronavirus and just how much of an impact it's going to have on the tech industry. But first, if we sound a little hoarse this week, that's because we spent last night at the very first Publisher Podcast Awards.
We did, and not just because we happen to be podcasters from the publishing industry, but we were shortlisted for the Best Technology Podcast Award 2020.
We were, as was our sister brand PC Pro. Shout out to the PC Pro podcast.
Yes. Sadly, neither us nor PC Pro won in that particular category, but another one of our sister podcasts, The Week Unwrapped, won in the Best Current Affairs category. So congratulations to those guys.
Yeah, it was a really fun event. For the first year it's been on, it was a really great turnout and a really enjoyable evening. It was put on by the Media Voices podcast team. And we are looking forward to winning it next year.
Indeed we are. Well, moving on from our excellent time last night, something less excellent that is happening over in Ireland. We start off with the news that Oracle is rumoured to be slashing more than 1,000 jobs in Europe. Now, this report comes from the Irish Times, and apparently up to 1,300 jobs are at risk across sales, business development and solutions engineering, with the majority of the job losses being centred in Ireland, as I said, but also Amsterdam and Malaga.
Yes, so this is a series of sweeping cuts. Staff have been invited to reapply for their roles, which is always fun. This is quite surprising in many ways. Oracle has been trying to compete in the cloud market with major public cloud players, Amazon Web Services and Azure, but revenues have not been super kind in the last quarter.
That sure is one way of putting it, yes.
So this announcement flies somewhat in the face of its statement last year, where Oracle said it was planning to hire 2,000 additional workers in 2020, when actually, as it turns out, what they meant was lose 1,300 of them.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, it's very unfortunate for the people involved. I mean, if 1,300 people are being asked to reapply for their jobs, that presumably means that at least some of them will be keeping their jobs. But it's a real shame for them. I don't think that it's, kind of, oh, that's it, Oracle, they're dead, off they go, goodbye. But it does show that perhaps trying to compete in cloud, on a level with AWS and Azure was perhaps a strategic mistake.
And Oracle has been, I think it's fair to say, aggressive in its efforts to compete with the big players. Notably, it, of course, has been embroiled in a lawsuit, which we talked about last episode, whereby it has been accused of strong-arming customers onto its cloud platform. Oracle, of course, is not the only big vendor who has been cutting back on its European workforce in recent years. IBM, notably, has also had a number of large-scale job cuts in recent years.
Yeah, I mean, I am a business journalist, but a business technology journalist rather than an economic journalist. I know that there is some instability or worries of instability in the European market and to do with the euro and stuff. So I wonder whether that's an element of it all as well. But once again, IBM is another big legacy vendor trying to compete in the cloud space. And, there's a question, I guess, over whether it's really worth it or not. But, time will tell, to end on a horrible cliche.
In other news, Hong Kong airline Cathay Pacific has this week been hit with a 500 grand fine by the Information Commissioner's Office for a data breach which affected almost 10 million people.
Yes, so it's important to note that while £500,000 is nothing to be sniffed at, it could have been a lot heavier had this happened under GDPR, but it didn't. It just kind of sneaked in before the new laws actually came into force.
So the breach occurred in 2018 and affected 9.4 million people with data including names, passport details, identity data, dates of birth, email addresses, postal addresses, phone numbers, and even historic travel records being put at risk.
So while the breach was discovered in 2018, the hole in its security had been there for 4 years, from October 2014 to May 2018. The airline is said to have not implemented even the most basic security measures, according to the ICO.
Yeah, there were a number of fundamental security inadequacies, according to the ICO's investigation, including passwordless backup files, internet-facing servers which were left unpatched, operating systems which similarly were not up to date and were unsupported by the manufacturer. If I had to guess, I would say it was probably Windows XP, but that's just a guess. And also inadequate antivirus software, apparently, none of which are good.
No, very bad individually and cumulatively very, very bad. Cathay, for its part, has said that it's invested heavily in IT and security since then. It's working with the ICO and other authorities, presumably to shore up its defences and ensure that nothing like this happens again, as far as possible. While this predates GDPR, BA was issued a big fine under GDPR. So, I mean, it's kind of worrying. Airlines, they hold all your data. They hold a lot of very sensitive data about you, and if they can't sort of look after that data properly, it's one of the more concerning types. Along with banks, it's ones that I'd be worried about. It
is, especially given that IT people and us as IT journalists do tend to travel an awful lot as part of work, flying to conferences and business meetings, although probably not so much of that this year, as we'll come on to a bit later on. But it is somewhat worrying that a number of major airlines have been subject to data breaches and various security whoopsies, shall we say.
Indeed. Moving on to our final story, we have further development in the continuing saga of Xerox's potential takeover of HP. The company has made a tender to acquire all shares held by HP shareholders. It announced it was going to do this 3 weeks ago, actually made good on that promise this week. It's offered $24 per share, which will be partially cash, just under $19 in cash, and then the other part is Xerox shares. HP is still saying that this is, it's rejected the deal over and over again. It says it's not a good deal for shareholders, but I guess this is Xerox putting the question to those shareholders.
And notably, HP has in fact countered this offer with a stock buyback program of its own, which it launched late last month, presumably in a bid to beat Xerox to the punch.
Yes, obviously we're not privy to the kinds of things that are going on right now. It'd be interesting to know which of these two campaigns is going to be more effective. It's possibly too early to say anyway at the moment.
Well, I would guess Xerox. My gut says Xerox is in quite a strong position. Looking at the markets, HP shares have risen in value every time that Xerox makes a move like this. So
I guess, but like the markets are fickle, and the thing is that with Xerox making the move, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Xerox making the move shows that HP is a desirable asset, which pushes up its shares, which and then round we go. So it's kind of to be expected.
This is a very good point. Xerox, of course, has been very aggressive in this campaign to wrest control of HP from HP. It has been making repeated efforts to try and broker a merger at the top levels of HP. And when that has proven unsuccessful, it has recently been wining and dining HP's existing shareholders in a bid to convince them to sell off their shares to Xerox and approve the hostile takeover of the company.
One of the notable shareholders who, if anybody else followed the Dell story back when it was taken public, you'll probably recognise the name Carl Icahn, an activist investor who is very, very, very up for Xerox taking over HP.
Yeah, he is one of the most bullish of bulls when it comes to tech investment. Of course, just on the subject of Carl's involvement with Dell, it's basically an open secret that one of the main reasons that Michael Dell took the company private again was to get out from under the thumb of Carl Icahn, who is in the habit of throwing his weight around in the boardroom when it comes to issues of corporate governance.
Indeed. And there was a distinct departure on the vision for Dell, whether that was kind of more hardware or more cloudy type stuff. So yeah, slightly different, but it was intriguing to see his name come up again when I've been following this particular story. So HP shareholders have until the 21st of April to take advantage of Xerox's offer, although there is the potential in the small print that deadline may be extended. So yeah, imagine it depends on how successful they are at encouraging people to sell their shares. If it's very successful straight away, then the 21st of April will probably hold up. And if there are far fewer people, then maybe not so much.
Well, yes, check in this time next month for an update on how that particular bout of corporate sparring has played out.
Indeed. Well, we're going to take a quick break now, but when we're back, we'll be talking about the coronavirus outbreak and how worried the tech industry should really be about it.
See you after the break. Welcome back. Now, it shouldn't come as any surprise that COVID-19, otherwise known as coronavirus, has been dominating headlines and public conversation recently. People are panic buying antibacterial products and even going as far as donning homemade hazmat suits on public transport to try and avoid catching the virus. But beyond general health concerns, we're asking, what impact will the outbreak have on the global tech industry?
Indeed. And, for pictures of those amazing homemade hazmat outfits, just head to Twitter. So I think the current impact is probably just blowing up Twitter's servers a little bit. So COVID-19, as it is now known, initially the outbreak was noted in Wuhan, in Henan province in China. It seemed to be centered just around there for a while, but quickly started spreading, much quicker than people initially thought, and indeed much quicker than I thought was happening. You can hear in earlier podcasts. Since then, it's spread basically across the globe. The major outbreak in Europe is in Italy, but as of this point of recording, there are now 90 confirmed cases in the UK. And one of the immediate impacts that it is having is shutting down factories in China, shutting down some schools and public buildings in certain other areas, Europe and stuff. And for the tech industry, there have been cancellations of most of the large conferences so far. So Google Cloud Next is now a virtual conference. Facebook F8 is a virtual conference.
MWC, of course,
MWC is a not conference, yes, as we've previously spoken about. It was completely cancelled. So that's been kind of, in an effort to contain the spread. You don't want thousands upon thousands of people near each other, shaking hands and stuff, even though at the point when MWC was cancelled, there have been no cases in Spain at all.
In fact, it's spread beyond the tech industry as well. Yeah, Auto Express podcast co-host Joe Holding compared trade shows in general to human soup, which is about as good a description of MWC as I've heard yet.
I thought you were going to call them Petri dishes or something.
Well, that too. It's well known that illnesses spread at these kind of things. Flu, as it's known, is a well-known phenomenon. But one of the interesting things with this is there's been obviously a huge upsurge in remote working as people, self-isolate either to contain their own infections or to minimize the risk of picking up the virus. And it's been a bit of a problem for some companies. There are some companies which just are not coping well with that huge upsurge in remote working, which they haven't had to deal with previously.
Yeah, I mean, as we go to air, HSBC has just evacuated is a bit of a strong word, but closed down one of its floors, sent everyone home to work from home. Because one person has tested positive for COVID-19. I find it intriguing that they haven't just sent everyone home, and I wonder if that's not kind of part of what you're saying, that they're just not prepared for that many people to work from home. We are very fortunate. You're in the studio currently, but I am recording once again from the comfort of my own home. The company we work for and our team are very, very supportive of it. But I put out on Twitter something one of our colleagues, Bobby Hellard, wrote about basically what we're talking about this outbreak being actually a golden opportunity for cloud to show how it can be an enabler of remote working, and that we don't all have to get together and spread our germs. But the person who replied to me said that it really depends on your manager, and that's very much true. Which is a shame, which is a real shame, because the cloud and remote working, this is exactly the kind of situation where you could be like, actually, do you know what, the whole contain bit, let's just stay at home and work from home. Most people in this country do not need to be in the office. It's nice to go in the office. I like seeing you and Maggie, Kumas, Bobby, Sabina, everyone, love it. But if you're going to give me some kind of horrible illness, I would rather look at you through a webcam and not have to see your diseased face.
Beg your pardon.
But you get my point. It's a real it's a real shame.
I think it's such a cultural thing, and it needs a huge amount of cultural support, which is possibly why HSBC has only evacuated the minimum number of people, because most financial institutions tend to be quite old school in their thinking. So it's possibly a cultural thing where they don't have that level of trust where they are happy with the majority of the workforce not being in the office.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, Google Cloud Next is now a virtual conference, which is a great idea. But at the same time, it's the law of unintended consequences, isn't it? Places like, say, the Feira de Barcelona, which hosts MWC and lots of other conferences, that's going to have an economic impact there, in the short term and in the longer term, if everybody goes towards these kind of virtual conferences. And
think about the poor pickpockets of Barcelona. What will they do?
But also for the smaller, companies, that for them, conferences that's the way they get exposure, really. A virtual conference probably isn't going to help them very much, because you're not going to amble by a virtual stall and be like, oh, that looks interesting.
Exactly. The thing that strikes me is this is actually a fairly good dry run for Brexit and the potential impacts that could have. Because as we've covered before, the tightening of immigration laws could well cause a severe talent crunch post-Brexit for the tech sector, which will necessitate a large amount of remote working if you want to hire talent from Europe to work in a UK-based office. So this is actually a fairly good, as I say, practice run for Brexit. The same applies to travel restrictions and supply chain issues. These are all things that may well rear their heads again after we officially leave the EU and exit the transitional period. So having an opportunity to get a jump on the preparations, as it were, is actually maybe a bit of a good thing.
You mentioned supply chain there, though, and this has been one of the problems that has been flung out by the COVID outbreak. Wuhan has is something of a tech hub, although it's more on the kind of fiber optic side than a lot of the other things you think of as for China. But Foxconn was supposed to be heading there. All of these factories have closed down, and John Honeyball, who writes frequently for ITPro, was saying last night that he's already seeing an impact on components, on hardware, that kind of thing. And we've seen this over and over again. The tech manufacturing industry and supply chains are really, really susceptible to disruption, whether it's from, this time it happens to be a outbreak of coronavirus, rather. But, anything that happens in Japan, China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Vietnam, it's serious. In 2011, I'm sure that anybody who buys hard drives will remember that Thailand was hit by some flooding, which caused a massive hard drive production shortage. For over a year it took to recover. 2013, a fire in China caused a major shortage of DRAM. Not last year, I'm living in the past. 2018, there was a typhoon that disrupted supply chains. And when I was doing my research on this, amazing that a 30-minute blackout at a Samsung NAND factory wiped out 11 months of production. That's incredible. It does seem that tech is very susceptible to just even the smallest little thing happening, and it can cause major disruption. Not that the COVID outbreak is particularly small, but a 30-minute electricity outage is, so you would think.
I think the issue is there's so many moving parts, as it were, that go into particularly hardware development and manufacturing, and if anything goes wrong with even one of them, that can, as you say, cause huge delays. I mean, it's a major problem, because if one tiny component is not available, you can't just leave it out when it comes to like a server or a smartphone or any kind of technical product. Really, there's so many interdependencies within hardware that anything that has to be rearranged or changed at the last minute basically necessitates a pretty lengthy redesign process.
Yeah, and I think much like the automotive industry, which has also been affected, there's a lot of reliance on just-in-time.
Yes.
There's a huge reliance on just-in-time manufacturing. We will link in the show notes to what that is if you are not familiar with the term, but it basically means you don't use warehouses, or as far as possible, you don't use warehouses. So, I mean, the question then becomes, is there any way around this, or is it just, occasionally we have to put up with a delay in our hardware, but, that's the price of trying to stop an outbreak, or, that's the price of global warming?
Realistically, I don't think you're going to be able to wean industry off just-in-time supply chain logistics, because it's just... when it works, it is just too efficient and too cost-effective to give up.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, that's all we have time for this episode. We'll be back next week with more top IT trends. In the meantime, you can follow ITPro on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, or subscribe to the ITPro newsletter for a daily roundup.
Remember to subscribe to the ITPro podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and leave us a rating and a review. You can also email podcast@itpro.co.uk to get in touch with us. But until next week, I've been Adam Shepherd.
I've been Jane McCallion.
And we will see you next time. The ITPro Podcast is brought to you by the Dennis Podcast Network.